Good. Well, so thank you for having us here today, Jim, and to be at your office. I thought that it would be helpful for people to know a little bit about you and a little bit about your background and your eye condition and how your experience has been with low vision. So if you could just tell us a little bit about yourself and
Well, I'm a boy from the Bronx,
okay.
and I started a business after graduating Cornell and getting my master's in business there. I started a business in Connecticut, a construction-related business, which was provided facades, windows for major office buildings, hospitals,
Mm-hmm.
and also steel for the structures. And I've always been very interested in athletics. I was a pretty good tennis player, and I played for my Cornell tennis team, and played a lot of tennis and some golf. So I was interested in athletics. It was an important part of my life. As a matter of fact, I was also a star in stickball in the Bronx. I was a three-sewer man.
Wow.
You know what a three-sewer man is?
We could hit it 3 sewers.
Yeah, we called them manholes in the middle of the street sewers. And if you could hit 3 sewers, you were very, very famous. And one day, Willie Mays played in a charity stickball tournament and hit 5 sewers. So
wow.
I didn't brag too much after that. But anyway, in the business, happily married, 3 great kids. And I think when I was about in my 60s,
Mm-hmm.
I was told by my ophthalmologist that I had a precursor to macular degeneration, which with drusen's were seen in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that this was the case because my father and his 3 brothers also had macular degeneration,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't even realize what was going on at the time. One regret I have is that I was insensitive to what he was going through,
Mm-hmm.
and he never had any of the tools which I've been able to get to keep going in a relatively normal way.
Mm-hmm.
And when I first got it, and it got worse and worse, it's degeneration, we were on a cruise, my wife Gail and I, and we ran into a couple. He was completely blind,
Mm-hmm.
had been blind since he was 17,
Mm-hmm.
and they were both professors. As a matter of fact, he was a professor in law school and was also one of the chief prosecutors in Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
and had gone through law school, graduate law school at Harvard, being completely blind.
Mm-hmm.
And, my reaction was, wow.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, what are you complaining about?
Yeah.
And I realized that I shouldn't complain.
Mm-hmm.
I had to do something to continue leading as normal a life as I could.
Mm-hmm.
And being interested in sports, I've always been a very, very competitive person.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I couldn't beat this, but I could fight it. And this guy told me about what he had. He had all kinds of gadgets and everything. And he said, then he asked me, he said, are you a veteran? And I said, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, you have the best place in the U.S. in West Haven, Connecticut. So I went to West Haven, Connecticut, met Kara, and that's where the story really moved along. Kara Gagnon, who was running the low vision area, has, I guess, the chief optometrist,
Mm-hmm.
examined me,
Mm-hmm.
and we figured out a good way to operate. We knew that it was going to get worse.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, Kara taught me how, when I went to Kara, vision scale would be, let's say from a scale of 1 through 10,
Mm-hmm.
I was maybe a 3.
Mm-hmm.
And Kara brought me up to being a 5. which is a remarkable change.
Mm-hmm.
And she did it by teaching me things. If I look at you directly, you're blurry.
Mm-hmm.
I've learned if I look at 1 o'clock, if I look at your left ear,
Mm-hmm.
you're a real handsome guy. Yeah. And so you learn this, and I do it automatically now.
Mm-hmm.
You learn also that I used to feel embarrassed. I'd walk into a restaurant or something and not
Mhm.
recognize somebody who I knew, and he thought, what the hell's going on with this guy? You know,
Right.
he's ignoring me. And I was a little embarrassed to say that I had this problem.
Mm-hmm.
Gail got me over the embarrassment. She says, you've got nothing to be embarrassed about.
Right.
And now when I see people and I apologize, say, I can't see it so well, I kid around about my vision.
Right.
But, so Kara, in addition to developing the sweet spot at 1 o'clock, tell me about a whole bunch of aids
Mm-hmm.
which could help.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I was sorry about is that I never learned to type.
Yeah.
And I would suggest to anybody who has early stages of macular degeneration or vision problems to learn how to type.
Mm-hmm.
Touch type.
Yeah.
Because I think that would make the lives a lot easier. And I never did. And now I have a very hard time using the hunt and peck method.
Yeah.
So with all of these aids, I'm able to get my life continue.
Mm-hmm.
I never had any downside, really. Of course, I had a lot of good people helping me out.
Mm-hmm.
I had a business which I was able to run despite my problem.
Mm-hmm.
I was still driving a car because macular degeneration doesn't happen abruptly.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a while. I drove a car until, I drove home one night in the snow, and I couldn't see the white lines. So I figured that's the end.
Yeah.
And by the way, I did recently got a driver's license.
Recently.
Renewal.
Ah.
And we went into the AAA. I said I'd like to get my driver's license renewed. And I didn't want to have a handicap type of ID. It's a little macho.
Yeah.
And they said, fine, that'll be $20-something. And I took my picture, got a driver's license. And we were laughing on the way out, and then we stopped laughing. This is a very serious situation. And I called a friend of mine who was in the state legislature, and she thought it was a serious situation. And a few days later, she called Gail and said, forget about it. It's too hot to handle.
Yeah.
This is something which is very, very difficult for many, many people, more so than me.
Yep.
But nevertheless, there's going to be a terrible accident one day, and that's when it'll change.
Yep. One of the main things that's a point of extreme frustration is just losing the independence that once had with full sight, and along the lines of independence, it's the losing of the wheels to the car.
Yeah.
To what you're saying.
Yeah.
You mentioned some vision rehabilitation techniques and tools that Dr. Kara Gagnon informed you about, but I want to kind of walk back the story a bit, and I want you to take me to when it kind of first happened to you, when you first noticed something was changing with your eyes. What was that like? What were you seeing that caused you to kind of go, what's going on here? And roughly at what age was that?
Oh, at the age of about 65.
Mm-hmm.
When I played tennis, the line was wiggly.
Wow.
And then I started missing shots that I didn't miss before.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, all the people I've been playing tennis with for these years were getting older, and they had their problems.
Mm-hmm.
But no, that's when I first noticed it.
And so if tennis started it, then did it also come about in other ways too, where you thought,
Yeah.
boy, what's going on here? Was it anything you were doing from day to day that caught your eye?
Yeah, it was tennis, and then I was not able to, watching a ball game or something, I wasn't able to see the score on the television. I had a difficult time watching intricate things on television. I had a problem reading. I was getting all kinds of, I was using magnifying glasses and using magnifiers, and it was really exhausting. So Kara, through her department, said, okay, we got to work out a plan. And the plan, the first thing I got was this. This is my routine now. As I come in the morning, I open up my mail using this to see what's going on. It reads it out loud to me. It doesn't read the mail, I'm sorry. I see what the mail is, and I can read it by enlarging the image.
Okay.
I have something else over here, which is a scanner, and I put a letter underneath it, takes a picture, and it will read the letter. I'm working on getting a combination, the latest model of this, as I understand it explained in Kara's office. The latest model of that does both. In other words, it'll read letters as well as email. This reads email through a program called Zoom Text.
Okay.
So without this, I'm lost. I have one of these at home, and I can look over things at home, anything I want. Of course, reading is virtually impossible without help.
Without help.
Instead of being really angry about it now, I understand that everybody's got something. This is mine, and I've got tools to help me work it out.
Right.
If I want to know what time it is,
The time is 10:43 a.m.
I've got a proper one. I have a scale that talks to me.
Right, and what these over the years have been very much like having different tools in your toolbox. That the first item that you had mentioned helps you to magnify things, but you need a couple of different tools to help you with your day-to-day tasks.
Right.
The point at where you met Dr. Gagnon, what I want to do is bring you back before that and tell me about, because I don't think that she was the first person that you met, the first doctor, correct?
Oh, no.
So when you became aware of your macular degeneration, and first by playing tennis and then by viewing different things throughout your day-to-day life, walk me through the process of the first step. Who did you call first when you noticed that your eyes were changing? Where was your first call?
Well, one of my very close friends was the chief of ophthalmology at Yale.
Okay.
And he knew my father.
Okay.
And I called him, and or I visited him. He looked at it. He said, "Yeah, you got macular degeneration," and he turned me over to his chief retina guy. And they looked, and they said, "Yeah, you've got macular degeneration." So I said, "Well, do something about it." They said, "We can't do anything about it. There's really nothing that can be done." Well, I wasn't willing to take that. So Gail and I went out to the Cleveland Clinic, where supposedly the world's greatest retina guy was there. A guy named Hillel Lewis. And we arranged to get some sort of a shot in my eye, and then I went out again to do that, and he looked and he said, "No," he said, "I wouldn't do it for my father, and I guess I shouldn't do it for you." It was something which they thought might help, but what it also would do would destroy part of the macula.
Right.
So Cleveland Clinic couldn't do anything. And then people talked about Columbia Presbyterian being like the great eye institute. So we went there, and it was the same thing. They couldn't do anything, and that's when we heard about the VA in West Haven,
Mm.
because what they were interested in, as the VAs are, they're interested in rehabilitation.
Mm-hmm.
And the hospitals and the great eye institutes are interested in cure. And that isn't necessarily what happens all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Cancer, for example, nowadays is being treated as a chronic disease.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if you can lead a relatively normal life with a chronic disease, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to lead a relatively normal life with a eye problem.
Mm-hmm.
So we went through all of this. And then we were at a Cornell event and ran into my friend Jane Brody.
Mm-hmm.
Jane Brody is one of the health editors of the New York Times.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going on? And we told her about this, and she said, everybody I know has got somebody in their family with macular degeneration.
Mm-hmm.
And I told her my story, just as I've just expressed it to you,
Mm-hmm.
about going to 3 places and they couldn't do anything. She said, I want to do a story about it, but I'll only do it if you let me use your name.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't really want to use my name. And anyway, she called me and said, we have an appointment because Gail told her, use his name.
Mm-hmm.
So they used my name. And they told the story more or less as I told you. And a friend of mine, for example, who lived in New York,
Mm-hmm.
had a friend,
Mm-hmm.
and I hadn't seen this guy for 75 years, had a friend who I went to camp with, who has macular degeneration. He's been through the same thing as me. And he got in touch with me, we talked, and he went to the VA.
Mm-hmm.
And was able to get some help. He was not able to do a lot of the technical things,
Mm-hmm.
as people in my generation find it difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I had more people pushing me to do it, including my wife Gail and Kara as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe I've become sort of a poster boy for the VA.
It seems as if the from what you're saying is a common experience, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I would like you to express the frustration that you've had with going to what appears to be, from all of with your resources, some of the best of ophthalmologists, and many people, I would imagine, are trying to go to their ophthalmologist to help solve the problem of macular degeneration. Is that the first step that people typically do? And is that what you did?
Well, that's what I did. Went to the ophthalmologist. I think there might be people who go to the eye doctor, whatever kind of eye doctor,
Mm-hmm.
ophthalmologist or optometrist or whatever, and they're told that, and they say I have a problem, and they're told that they have the problem, and the first step really is one of the so-called professionals, and I use so-called because a lot of people are not professional in that they're not interested in finding out what's wrong other than to cure what's.
Mm-hmm.
Is they give out something called an Amsler grid,
Mm-hmm.
where you look at, and if the lines are wiggly, you've got macular degeneration. Well, that doesn't cure anything, and I already knew I had macular degeneration, so why do I want to look at this?
Mm-hmm.
But that's the first thing that happens, and then people can't read and can't do all of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm fortunate that I was able to go to see these so-called hot shots. As it turned out, none of the hot shots were able to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, a friend of mine in New York went to Columbia Presbyterian with the Jane Brody article. And the chief of ophthalmology there, who he knew, said he felt the article demeaned Columbia,
Mm-hmm.
because in the article it stated that they couldn't do anything. And when he said that it demeaned Columbia, it really pissed me off.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Yale,
Mm-hmm.
Yale and I.
Mm-hmm.
And the chief of ophthalmology at Yale,
Mhm.
Yale at the time, thought this, what we presented to him was fantastic. We were willing to give Yale what for me is a substantial amount of money
Mm-hmm.
to develop a vision rehabilitation center
Mm-hmm.
as part of the Department of Ophthalmology.
Mm-hmm.
And Jim Sy, who was the chief at the time, and his right-hand person by the name of Ron Adelman,
Mm-hmm.
thought it was great. They did all kinds of financial planning, and Yale turned it down.
Mm.
And why did they turn it down? Wasn't going to make money.
So that's the key from what you're saying, is that the vision rehab treats the problem, but there isn't vision rehab being offered for
Not
many
exactly.
people.
The vision rehab mitigates the problem,
Mm-hmm.
or okay, treats the problem. But people don't know what to do to get vision rehab.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, the VA is fine for people who served were in the service.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a very small percentage of women were in the service. So, how many women can get help from the VA?
Mm-hmm.
How many children?
Mm-hmm.
And people in general can. You go to the departments of ophthalmology at the great institutions, and they're not particularly interested in it. You can't operate.
You can't cure it.
You can't cure it.
Mm-hmm.
There are things now. There's wet macular degeneration and dry.
Mm-hmm.
For the wet, they can give shots. They give which I get.
Mm-hmm.
I have wet in one eye and dry in the other. The shot more or less prevents the formation of blood vessels, which cause the pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And that is done now. It wasn't done when I needed it.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, I have some scarring in my left eye, which can't be cured.
Mm-hmm.
But that can be done by ophthalmologists, but it doesn't cure, it stops. And it stops wet, which is more dangerous, but the dry there's really nothing to do other than a pill, which is put out by Bausch and Lomb, which who knows how good it is. It's a mixture of vitamins. But the thing that has to be done is the government's got to realize that Medicare certainly,
Mm-hmm.
and also the health insurance,
Mm-hmm.
and I hope the Obamacare stays, it doesn't have to stay exactly the way it is, but it should remain, should pay for this, because for society, I'm able to work and do everything that I did before. And other people should be able to work and do things that they did before. And if you can keep people in their homes and you can keep people working, it certainly saves society money.
Mm-hmm.
And it's certainly a lot better investment than building a wall between us and Mexico.
So I wanted to ask you about that. You found from your experience that there is no, well, let me ask you, is there coverage for any of these technology through insurances from your experience?
No.
Beyond the VA?
No.
So the VA is the primary source of resource for people to help them get the technology that they need.
It's the only source that I know.
And
And my friend in Canada said there's nothing in Canada.
Nothing in Canada either.
Right.
So you went to the ophthalmologist, and they weren't able to cure the eye condition. There was kind of a dead end there,
Yeah.
to a degree. Did you go to your optometrist at all? Did they help? Was that a visit that you made, or a phone call that you made to an optometrist?
I had never visited an optometrist. I mean, as a young person, my eyesight was better than 20/20.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get my first reading glasses till I was about 60. I mean, I had very good, I never, the first optometrist I ever met was Gagnon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And so as I'm following your story, it was a series of serious visits to ophthalmologists to help you.
Oh yeah.
And they were trying, but nothing against the ophthalmologist. No one can solve and cure macular degeneration. And then
Well, it is against the ophthalmologist. I think the ophthalmologist, if they were doing the jobs properly, would have thought that it would be a good idea to have some area where vision rehabilitation could be done. I mean, they knew of certain things, but paid no attention to it. Now, more and more they're learning about it. And I think that an ophthalmology department or an ophthalmologist should send people to a vision rehabilitation center, which I would like to see set up for all kinds of people, for people who can't afford things to use, and for people who, sure.
So with this vision rehabilitation center outside the VA not being there, if a person who has macular degeneration goes and visits their ophthalmologist who can't cure them, and if the person is not a veteran, what does a person do? What are the options for them?
Most people don't have any options. The people I talk to have some sort of options. I explain what I think they can do. The Lighthouse for the Blind in New York, for example, I went to them too. I mean, all that they really knew about was magnifying glasses like this. But not even good ones. I don't know what they're doing there. This is a science which has to be done in a manner which helps. Not that puts a little Band-Aid on.
So the solution is, as best as we can determine at this point, one of the big missing links from what you're saying is the lack of vision rehabilitation.
Right.
Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And then how long you visited the ophthalmologist, how long has it been from that point until you met the vision rehab team led by Dr. Kara Gagnon?
It must have been 3 or 4 years.
3 or 4 years. And in that 3 to 4 years, can you remember that 3 to 4 years of time? What was that like?
Well, it was getting worse. It was getting worse all the time. But I was still able to do things. I was still able to drive. And I was still able to do things like that. Your point being that could I have been helped earlier? Would it have helped? Yeah, it probably would have helped. I would have learned how to type or something better. I mean, my routine in the morning depends on gadgets that I have. It depends on my reader, and it depends on this. And then I also have what's called a Victor reader. I read more books now than I ever did. I get books with digitally loaded. I got that from the VA. And I'm reading books all the time. Reading, I say reading, but listening to them.
Listening to them. So now we've reached the point, I think, where you, and you alluded to it before, but you had an appointment now. You have not met Dr. Kara Gagnon at this point.
Right.
You have an appointment with the VA.
Yeah.
What was your level of expectation? And then what was your experience after when you met Dr. Kara Gagnon?
Well, the level of I didn't really have a level of expectation because I've been disappointed wherever I went. The expectation was that this guy in Canada had said that the VA was a good place. The VA in West Haven. When I met Kara Gagnon, she gave me an eye exam, which took hours. Figured out the type of sunglasses I should wear, told me I should wear sunglasses all the time, figured out the type of glasses I should wear. We're looking at computers, where you're further away than reading glasses, figuring out reading glasses. I have glasses for everything, including watching television, and the glasses that I use for television, I don't know whether people realize, but I also use them for watching hockey games. The same glass, they're sort of like binoculars or monoculars. So I mean, there's a lot of things like this which make your life easier.
Can I just jump in, because I know we're splicing this up? Jim, can you, what I think is really important for a viewer of this to know is, you know, making that connection between you sought out all the hot shot clinics, which you've done very well in this conversation, but besides prosthetics, which I think is important, and obviously this company sells them, but if you could speak to what you first learned. The reason why I take hours is because I explain about the anatomy, and we found your sweet spot through eccentric viewing, and it's called your preferred retinal locus. And just the fact that I think patients experience, and you can relate to this, things would be flashing as clear, not clear there. You weren't sure how to access that sweet spot, and we take so much time, and once you know that, you can use it to see facial features, you can use it to use the reading glasses and these machines. Like, that's the whole part that I think the general public needs to understand, that there's this functional vision component. And once you know how, if you take time to find that eccentric view, it brings the level of magnification you need down, it increases your fluency. Just like that, if you could just, that little nugget.
I think that's important because it isn't the gadgets, it isn't the widgets, it's learning what you have in that reorientation, working with the various devices and resources that makes the kapow happen.
It's the vision.
The magic happens.
I think then the question would be it's the vision rehab appointment. What is that like, and how is that different than going to the ophthalmologist?
Right.
Oh,
Or an
optometrist.
optometrist or an optician at like Kennedy and Perkins.
I think most people who are going to be watching this video never heard of a vision rehab appointment. They've heard of the ophthalmologist, they've heard of the optometrist, they kind of know what that is, but what's unique to your experience, which is what changed your life from what I'm gathering, is the vision rehab appointment.
But I think we have to say low vision optometrist, because I think there's a lot of confusion in the world right now, because they say vision rehab is the Lions Club handing out magnifiers.
Correct.
They say vision rehab is OTs now just going into homes. Really, vision rehab, like, you know, an orthopedic surgeon puts a hip in and then you go to PT, a low vision optometrist does the refraction, finds the preferred retinal locus, trains that, and then they hand off to a low vision rehab person too. You know, so I don't want to be confusing with our terminology. So it's just, I think what Gail said is correct. It's not so much about, I mean, we can get into the devices, but if you don't ever learn how to access that sweet spot, and Jim is very good at doing that. He knows how to find that PRL, and he'll see facial features, he'll read more fluently and for longer periods. People that come into me, like I had a guy come in recently that his ophthalmologist said he had dead eyes. This was 2 weeks ago. And I got him through explaining, he had no clue what his eye condition was. Explaining every part of the eye and retina and cornea and what was going on. By the time he left, I refracted him down to something like 20/60. This was a dead eyes. And he's the gentleman who's coming Friday to do this testimony. And so I just think people need to know, as you're going to these doctors, it's frustrating, you feel like a victim because you're trying to save your own vision. So if you can empower a patient to not feel victimized and know where that sweet spot is and become really functional, it changes the game. And I think, Jim, that's the point. You felt frustrated until you got that kind of an exam, and then it changed the game for you because you knew how to get to that sweet spot.
well, okay.
So something like that.
In order to use the gadgets, you have to develop a skill to use the gadgets. And I'm not talking about technical skill like using computers.
Right.
But in order to look at people and to read and whatever you want to do, the sweet spot is important. I feel, and I don't know whether it's true or not, that my peripheral vision may be better than it was before. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but it may be because I depend upon my peripheral vision more than I did before. I did go to optometrist before Cara Gagnon. I went to change glasses, and that's an optometrist. But people, you look at an eye chart and they figure out what they think you need, and that's what an optometrist usually does. But low vision optometry is different. First of all, the charts in the ophthalmologist's office and in most optometrists' place is a lighted box with a usually with a light above it or something. And if somebody's got macular degeneration, you need as much contrast as possible. So the eye test right at the start is not accurate. And if the eye test is not accurate, what are you prescribing? I mean, I must have had 50 different types of glasses. And I didn't realize till later that I got poor eye tests in order to get these glasses. Now, the way that a low vision optometrist should do it is they use cards instead, and with proper light on it and proper contrast. I mean, I was getting so when I was taking the eye test at places like Yale, which bothered me because, as I say, I'm a pretty competitive guy. I hated not to see the bottom line. I'd memorized the line, and when the doctor came in, I said, I just read the bottom line, and she sort of freaked out. But, I mean, it's a different field.
Yeah.
Optometry is a field, low vision optometry is another field. And in order to use this, for example, it's very important that you know how to use, you know how to look at it. When I get up in the morning, I look at my alarm clock. If I look at it directly, I don't know what time it is, but I know when I get up in the morning, I look at my alarm clock, I'm looking at 1 o'clock in order to see what it looks like.
Yeah, along those lines, if you were going to counsel somebody who might be in their 50s or 60s or just coming upon the awareness of an eye change, talk to that person. What would you tell them to do? What are the steps forward that you think they should take based upon your experience?
If they could find one, they should go to a low vision optometrist who will figure out the best thing they can do to maintain whatever vision they have. Now, I don't know how they're going to find a low vision optometrist. What you're doing now seems to be a very unique approach to this.
Yeah, the low vision optometrist is key, and most ophthalmologists don't know that. Most optometrists don't know that. Most in the eye care field don't know that.
Right.
Have you met many people who have low vision and have shared similar experiences? And
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the things that the frustrations that you have heard other people say as well?
The frustration that they don't know where to go. I'll tell you a story. I had a call, or Gail had to call, maybe 11 o'clock one night, from a guy who had seen my name in the Jane Brody article and wanted to talk to me what to do. And call him back any time. And we had gotten home from something, and the call sounded so urgent that Gail said, let's call him now. And we call this guy. He's in New Jersey. Turns out he's an architect and sculptor. So his life was getting destroyed. He was able to get no help. Fortunately, he was a veteran. So I put him in touch with Kara at the West Haven VA. And he came down. And he stayed there for a couple of weeks. And one night Kara called and said, this man wants to talk. I never met him or anything. I don't even remember his name. But would like to meet you and thank you. And as he said that, Gail was walking in the door here. And I said, well, let's have dinner. So the four of us we met at the VA. And he walked out and he looked at them. They were sort of talking to each other. He pulled me aside, whispers in my ear. He said, "I don't know how to thank you." He said, "I was going to commit suicide."
Wow.
And I'm sure he's not the only one who felt that way. For somebody to say that,
yeah, the point of frustration, I mean, we can all only imagine, if we're not going through it ourselves, the frustration of losing one's sight and having that diminish. And then as a result of that, the different things you could do more easily are now harder to do. Even just driving and work and daily living. And so that's where a lot of people are today who have macular degeneration, is that the ophthalmologist can't solve the problem, the optometrist can't solve the problem, and what is needed, I think, from what you're saying, is the low vision optometrist in vision rehabilitation.
Right.
Correct?
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you wanted to see if we could have Jim highlight or share from your experience that would be helpful?
You know, I think if you get Gail in and talking, it might. Jim did a beautiful job covering that.
Thanks.
I mean, it was really, his story is what he did that most people do is they start to give up, you know, and they start to believe there's nothing else that can be done for you.
Okay.
And why shouldn't they believe that when they're at Cleveland Clinic and Columbia and Yale and Johns Hopkins and Baskin Palmer, when they say there's nothing else? Why should anybody believe any differently? This is the panacea, these places. So Jim was persistent enough to say, I don't believe that, you know. There's something that I can do for myself. And he had the willpower and the love of Gail and the support from Gail to go on that journey together. And I think that's an important message to people. And when Gail speaks, maybe Jim will get back in if it prompts him to think of anything else. But I think we need to sort of define low vision optometry a little bit, because I think we labeled it really well, and maybe Gail will do that. It's just my hope for these people when they hear is, number one, that it gives them hope and it gives them a direction, because that's what Jim's story is going to do, and it's powerful. And that's what happened with the Jane Brody article, and that one man was just one example. We had many reach outs from that article. But I think this messaging is about telling people, yeah, you might have heard this. There's nothing else that can be done. But there are professionals that will stop and help you to find, where's your sweet spot, and now let's maximize it. And it may change in the course of your disease. There may be another part of your retina that we're going to have to work with, and so we do. You know, and there's devices that you can magnify print, but there's devices you can listen to print. And I can certainly do this on film later too.
Yep, we're gonna later on today when we go back to the clinic, we're going to be videotaping yourself. But Gal, would you mind?
Yeah, I'd love to do it.
Okay.
And I will do it. I have one caveat, and I have an appointment at 12 noon.
Okay.
So I just need to
Do it.
do that.
Where do you want Gail to sit?
I think right next to you.